My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 41 years old, and the first time my older brother Grant charged a personal dinner to our mother's credit card and told her it was a pharmacy copay, I thought it was a misunderstanding. That was 19 years ago. By the time I stopped counting, the total had reached $314,000, and that was only what I could document. I kept records of all of it, not because I planned to use them, because that's what I do. I track things. I am a catastrophe loss adjuster for a regional insurance carrier. I spend my professional life walking through wreckage, hail-stripped roofs, flood-warped foundations, fire-hollowed kitchens, and turning damage into numbers. I measure what people have lost. I verify what they claim. I determine, with decimal point precision, the difference between what actually happened and what someone says happened. That skill had kept families and institutions honest for 16 years across 9 states. It was about to do the same thing to my own family. I remember standing in my mother's kitchen in Ashtabula, Ohio, 6 months ago, the Tuesday evening that started all of this in its final form, holding a MasterCard statement I'd picked up from the counter while she was in the other room. The fluorescent light above the stove buzzed at that particular frequency that meant the ballast was going. I could smell the lemon dish soap she'd used since I was 9, and my eyes locked on a line item, $1,247, dated March 3rd, payable to Lakeshore Custom Contracting. My thumb pressed into the edge of the paper. I didn't move. I was already counting. That charge didn't belong on a 72-year-old retired school librarian's credit card. Lakeshore Custom Contracting was Grant's company, and $1,247 was not a pharmacy copay. Before I take you through what those records show, tell me, what time is it where you are? Because I remember the time of every single incident on this list. I've learned that timestamps matter more than apologies. They tell you who someone was before they knew they'd need to explain themselves. The first time it happened, I was 22. Grant was 27, freshly licensed as a general contractor, operating out of a rented office on Route 20 with 1 employee and a truck he'd leased in our father's name. Dad had died the year before, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, buried in February. Mom was still paying off the hospital bills that insurance hadn't fully covered. She was working double shifts at the elementary school library, shelving books until her wrists ached because the pension wouldn't kick in for another 11 years. Grant asked her for $800 to cover what he called a licensing surcharge. Mom wrote the check the same afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table studying for my adjuster certification exam when she tore it from the book. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. Grant was her firstborn, the one who looked like Dad, the one who'd given the eulogy that made the whole church weep. When Grant asked, the answer was already yes before the question finished leaving his mouth. That brought the total to $800, and we were only in 2007. 6 months later, it was $2,200 for what Grant described as a bonding requirement for a county project. Then $1,500 for a truck repair he said the lease wouldn't cover. Then $3,000 because a client had stiffed him and he needed to make payroll. Each time, Grant arrived at the house with the same unhurried confidence, the same way of leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed and his voice easy, as though he were doing Mom a favor by letting her participate in his success. "It's temporary," he'd say. "Next quarter's going to be huge. I'll pay you back double." He never paid back anything. By the time I passed my adjuster exam and started working claims out of the Cleveland field office, the total had crossed $11,000. I mentioned it to Grant once, casually, at Thanksgiving. I said something about Mom's fixed income and how the hospital bills were still on a payment plan. He looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "She offered, Danny. I didn't ask." Then he carved the turkey. The irony was that I had spent every working day measuring the distance between what people claimed and what the evidence showed. I could spot an inflated roof replacement estimate from across a conference table. I could tell you whether hail damage was fresh or pre-existing from the shape of the dents. But in my own family, I watched the same pattern repeat for nearly 2 decades and called it something other than what it was. I called it Grant being Grant. I called it Mom being generous. I called it none of my business. The professional word for what I was doing is called failing to investigate a known loss indicator, and I did it for 19 years. Mom's house was the one constant. a 3-bedroom Cape Cod on Walnut Street that Dad had bought in 1986 for $47,000. White aluminum siding, green shutters, a detached garage where Dad had kept his tools organized on a pegboard with black marker outlines around each one. After he died, those outlines stayed. Mom never moved the tools, she just dusted around them. That house was paid off by 2003, no mortgage, no lien. The only monthly obligations were utilities, property tax, and the supplemental insurance she kept on Dad's old workshop equipment out of pure sentiment. Grant's company grew, or appeared to. By 2012, Lakeshore Custom Contracting had 4 trucks, a proper office on the east side of town, and a website with stock photos of kitchens Grant hadn't built. He married Jess, a dental hygienist from Mentor, and they bought a house in Madison with a pool and a 3-car garage. Grant hosted Christmases there starting in 2014. He seated himself at the head of the table, literally. He'd bought a dining set where one chair was larger than the others, and held court the way our father never had. Dad had been quiet. Grant performed. Mom attended every gathering radiantly. She brought her cranberry walnut stuffing in the same ceramic dish she'd used since 1991. She complimented the house, complimented Jess, complimented the children. Grant had 2 boys, Caleb and Owen, and never, not once, mentioned money. Not the checks she'd written, not the credit card charges that had started appearing in 2016, after Grant convinced her to add him as an authorized user for what he called emergency gas purchases when he was on job sites. I watched this happen. I lived 40 minutes away in Paynesville. I visited Mom every other Sunday. I noticed the charges when I helped her organize her tax documents each April, and every year I told myself the same thing. It's her money, it's her choice, he's her son. I filed it the way you file a claim you know is borderline but can't prove is fraudulent. You note it, you flag it internally, and you move on to the next loss. The charges escalated after 2018. That was the year Grant's company lost a bid on a school renovation project, a $400,000 job that would have carried him through the winter. I know this because Mom told me, worried about him, her voice carrying that particular frequency mothers use when they're preparing to open their wallets. Within 2 months, 3 new charges appeared on her MasterCard: $2,100 to a building supply company, $1,800 to an equipment rental outfit, and the $3,200 charge that made me sit down at her kitchen table and stare at the statement for a very long time. That $3,200 was paid to Lakeshore Custom Contracting directly. Grant had charged his own company on our mother's credit card. Something in me went very still. My hands were flat on the table, pressing down as though the surface might move. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I wasn't angry yet. I was running numbers I hadn't asked myself to run. That brought the total, the documented, verifiable total from bank statements and credit card records I had access to through the tax files, to $87,400. And we were only in 2018. I'm going to take you through this year by year. But first, drop your location in the comments. I want to know how many people are watching someone finally read the numbers out loud. Between 2019 and 2023, the pattern didn't just continue, it professionalized. Grant stopped asking Mom for checks. Instead, the credit card charges became routine: $400 here, $900 there, always to vendors connected to his business. He also began asking for what he called bridge loans, cash transfers from Mom's savings account to his business checking account, always with a promise of repayment within 60 days. I found the transfer receipts in her filing cabinet. She kept them in a manila folder labeled Grant, Business. 23 transfers, not one repayment deposited back. That brought the running total to $196,000. I verified every line item against her bank statements, her credit card records, and the tax documents she'd given me copies of each April. Then I found something else. In January of this year, while helping Mom switch to a new internet provider, her old one had raised the rate and she was too proud to call and negotiate. I needed to access her email to reset a password. Her inbox contained 14 emails from a mortgage servicing company. Mom had taken out a home equity line of credit on the Walnut Street house, the house that had been free and clear since 2003. The HELOC was opened in September 2022. The borrowing limit was $120,000. The current balance drawn was $118,000. The monthly payment was $847 on a retirement income of $2,100. I read those emails sitting on the floor of her living room with the laptop balanced on my knees. The carpet was the same beige Berber she'd had installed when I was in middle school. The television was on, some cooking competition she liked, and I could hear her in the kitchen making tea, the kettle beginning to whistle. I closed the laptop very slowly. I set it on the coffee table. I looked at the wall above the television, where she still had the same framed family portrait from 1994, Dad in his good flannel, Mom with her hair curled, Grant and me in matching polo shirts she'd bought at Sears. I stared at that photograph for a long time. That brought the total to $314,000. That was not a number I could file away. I started with the HELOC documents. I requested the full origination file from the mortgage company by certified mail, identifying myself as the authorized contact on Mom's account. She'd added me years ago for exactly the kind of emergency she didn't know she was already inside. The loan application arrived 10 days later. The stated purpose of the HELOC was home improvement. The appraised value of the home at origination was listed as $189,000, which was reasonable for the neighborhood. But the application listed anticipated improvements totaling $95,000, a new roof, updated electrical, kitchen renovation, bathroom remodel. I drove to Walnut Street that Saturday morning. The roof was the same 20-year architectural shingle installed in 2011. The electrical panel in the basement still had the Federal Pacific breakers Dad had complained about. The kitchen was unchanged. The bathroom had the same pink tile from 1987. No improvements had been made. The HELOC had been drawn for cash, not construction. I pulled the disbursement records next. The $118,000 had been withdrawn in 9 draws over 14 months, each deposited into a checking account at a credit union in Madison, not Mom's bank, not her credit union. I called the mortgage servicer and confirmed the receiving account was not in her name. It took me one afternoon to verify. The account belonged to Lakeshore Custom Contracting LLC. Grant had used Mom's house as collateral for his business cash flow. And the loan application's stated purpose, home improvement, was a fabrication. I requested Mom's credit card statements going back to 2016, all of them, directly from the issuer. I sat at my own kitchen table in Painesville, with 7 years of statements printed and sorted chronologically, a yellow legal pad beside me, and a calculator I didn't actually need because the math was already running in my head. I cross-referenced every charge to Lakeshore-connected vendors against Grant's publicly filed contractor project list, available through the County Building Department's online portal. 14 of the charges corresponded to projects where Grant had already billed the client for the same materials. He'd charged Mom's card for supplies, then invoiced the client for those same supplies at markup, double billing, using our mother as the invisible second payer. Then I found the older pattern. I requested Dad's old bank records. Mom had kept the account open as a secondary savings vehicle, barely used, with a balance that had hovered around $6,000 for years, except it hadn't always hovered. In 2006, the year after Dad died, 3 withdrawals, totaling $14,500 had been made. The withdrawal slips were signed. The signature was not Mom's. The slant was wrong. I knew Mom's handwriting the way I knew the grade of a roof pitch, instinctively, from years of reading her letters and her labels on Christmas packages. These signatures leaned 15 degrees further right. The loops on the lowercase a were closed where Mom's were always open. I pulled a canceled check Grant had written to Mom 2 Christmases ago, a $200 gift check she'd never cashed, and laid it beside the withdrawal slips. The handwriting matched. Grant had forged Mom's signature on withdrawal slips the year after our father died, and taken $14,500 from a grieving widow's savings account. That was the first theft. Everything else was escalation. The total, across 19 years of checks, credit card charges, unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures, and a fraudulent HELOC, came to $328,500. I wrote it at the bottom of the legal pad. I circled it once. I set down the pen and sat in my kitchen for a very long time without moving. Grant hosted a 4th of July gathering every year at his house in Madison. The pool, the 3-car garage, the oversized dining chair. He grilled steaks on a $4,000 smoker and talked about his projects while Jess poured drinks and their boys ran through the sprinkler. Extended family came: Mom's sister, 2 of Dad's cousins, neighbors who'd known us growing up. It was Grant's performance space, his monument. He controlled the guest list, the seating, the music, the conversation. I arrived at 1:15 p.m. on July 4th with a manila envelope and a calm I had earned through 3 months of preparation. Grant was at the grill when I walked through the side gate. He had tongs in one hand and a beer in the other. "Danny, you made it. Grab a plate, we're about 10 minutes out on the brisket." Casual, proprietary. As though the yard and everything in it, the food, the people, the afternoon itself, belonged to him. I said, "After we eat." Mom was seated at the patio table under the pergola Grant had built the previous summer, or claimed to have built. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wore to every outdoor gathering because she was always cold, even in July. I kissed her forehead. She smelled like the same Jergens lotion she'd used my entire life. We ate. I waited. People talked about the weather, about the county fair, about Caleb's travel baseball team. Grant told a story about outbidding a competitor on a commercial project. He used the phrase business instincts twice. Jess cleared plates. Mom complimented the potato salad. When the table was mostly cleared and people were settling into lawn chairs with drinks, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. "Grant, I need to talk to you about Mom's finances. Here, now, Mommy whinge." He laughed, not nervously, dismissively. "Danny, come on, it's the 4th. Whatever it is, it can wait until Monday." It can't. The wahed went quiet the way outdoor spaces do when the ambient conversation drops. Suddenly you can hear the neighbor's wind chime 3 houses over. I opened the envelope and placed the first document on the patio table. This is the HELOC origination file for Mom's house on Walnut Street, opened September 2022. $118,000 drawn into an account belonging to Lakeshore Custom Contracting. The stated purpose was home improvement. No improvements were made. Grant set his beer down. "That's a private financial arrangement between Mom and me. She agreed to help with cash flow." I placed the second document beside it. "These are the disbursement records showing 9 draws over 14 months. And these are the credit card statements showing $87,400 in charges to Lakeshore-connected vendors between 2016 and 2023, 14 of which correspond to projects where you also invoiced the client for identical materials. You went through Mom's personal financial records?" His voice shifted, not to guilt, but to offense. "That's a violation of her privacy, Danny. You had no right." Mom added me as authorized contact on every account she has. I had every right. Jess stood near the sliding door, a serving tray frozen against her hip. Mom's sister, Aunt Carol, put her hand over her mouth. Mom sat perfectly still in her blue cardigan, looking at the documents on the table as though they were written in a language she was only now learning to read. Grant tried the loyalty pivot. "After everything I've done for this family, keeping this tradition alive, giving Mom a place to come every holiday, making sure the boys know their grandmother, you're going to stand here and treat me like a criminal?" "I'm not treating you like anything. I'm reading you a ledger." "You've always been jealous, Danny." His voice hardened. "You sit in your little cubicle adjusting other people's claims and you resent that I built something, that I took risks, that I'm the one who carried Dad's name forward." I placed the third document on the table. The withdrawal slips from 2006, Dad's account. These are 3 withdrawals totaling $14,500 from Dad's savings account, made the year after he died. The signatures are forged, they're in your handwriting. I have the comparison samples. The yard went absolutely silent. Grant stared at the slips. His jaw worked once, twice, but nothing came out. Aunt Carol spoke. She'd been sitting in a lawn chair near the fence, and she stood slowly, the way someone stands when their knees are bad but the moment requires them to be upright. "I co-signed the closing documents on that house in 2003 when your mother paid off the mortgage," she said. "And I was the one who helped her open that savings account after your father died. She told me last March she was worried about her bills. I assumed it was the cost of living." She looked at Grant. I helped raise you, Grant. I drove you to Little League. I cannot stand here and watch you tell your brother he's jealous for doing what someone should have done years ago." Grant's face changed, not collapse, more like a wall developing cracks too numerous to patch. He pointed at me. "You planned this. You brought this here, to my home, in front of everyone, to humiliate me." I looked at him across the patio table covered in documents and the remains of potato salad. Grant charges people for the same materials twice and calls it business. He borrows against a house he doesn't own and calls it cash flow. He forges a dead man's widow's signature and calls it family. I did not say anything else. The sprinkler was still running in the side yard. One of the boys, Owen, the younger one, was standing at the corner of the house, watching. I caught his eye and walked over to him. I knelt down so I was at his level. "Hey buddy, your dad and I are having a grown-up disagreement. It's not about you. You didn't do anything wrong. You want to go find your brother and I'll take you both for ice cream in a little bit?" He nodded. I watched him run inside. 3 weeks after the 4th, Mom's attorney, a woman named Sandra Patel, whom I'd found through the County Bar Association's Elder Law Referral Program, filed a petition to freeze the HILOC and initiate a forensic accounting of all transfers from Mom's accounts to Lakeshore Custom Contracting. The mortgage servicing company launched its own internal review after Sandra submitted evidence that the loan application contained material misrepresentations. By mid-August, the county prosecutor's office had opened an investigation into the forged withdrawal slips, financial elder abuse. Grant retained a defense attorney. He did not call Mom. He did not call me. Jess filed for legal separation on August 29th. I know the date because Aunt Carol told me. Jess had found additional charges on a business credit card she hadn't known existed, restaurant bills, hotel stays, none of them in Astable County. The separation filing cited financial misconduct and breach of trust. Grant's bonding company pulled his contractor's surety bond in September after the prosecutor's investigation became a matter of public record. In Ohio, you cannot operate as a licensed general contractor without a surety bond. Lakeshore Custom Contracting effectively ceased to exist. 3 active projects were left unfinished. 2 of those clients filed civil suits. The house in Madison went on the market in October. Grant couldn't carry the mortgage without business income. The listing price was $389,000. It sold for $341,000 after 62 days. The 3-car garage, the $4,000 smoker, the oversized dining chair, all included in the sale because Grant didn't have anywhere to put them. Jess moved with the boys to her mother's house in Mentor. I called her once, in November, not about Grant, but about Caleb and Owen. I asked whether they needed anything for school. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Their winter coats from last year still fit, but Owen's boots don't." I ordered 2 pairs of boots from a store in Mentor and had them shipped to her mother's address. I did not put a note inside. Aunt Carol came to Mom's house the first Sunday in December. She brought a casserole and sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. Mom told me later that Carol had cried and said she was sorry she hadn't seen it sooner. "I thought he was doing well," Carol said. "He always seemed like he was doing well." Mom patted her hand and said, "He seemed like his father's son. That's what I wanted to see." Carol asked if Mom could forgive her for not paying closer attention. Mom said, "I'm still figuring out what I'm forgiving." That answer stayed with me. It contained more honesty than anything I'd heard in 19 years. Sandra Patel negotiated a restitution agreement in January. Grant agreed to repay $118,000, the HILOC balance, through a structured payment plan secured against his remaining personal assets. The credit card charges and forged withdrawals remained subjects of the ongoing criminal investigation. Grant entered a guilty plea to 1 count of financial exploitation of an elderly person in March. The sentence was 3 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a restitution order covering the full documented amount. Mom's HELOC was frozen, then paid down as restitution payments began arriving. Sandra estimated it would take 4 to 5 years to fully retire the balance. The house on Walnut Street was safe. Mom would not lose it. In April, I took a week off work, the first full week I'd taken in 3 years. I drove to Walnut Street and spent 5 days doing things I'd been meaning to do since Dad died. I replaced the Federal Pacific breakers in the basement, the ones that had been a fire risk for 20 years. I recaulked the windows in the living room. I fixed the ballast on the fluorescent light above the kitchen stove so it stopped buzzing. I cleaned the garage and reorganized Dad's tools on the pegboard, fitting each one back inside its black marker outline. Mom brought me coffee every morning and sat on the garage step watching me work without saying much. On the third day, she said, "Your father would have done this exact thing," quietly, without being asked. I tightened a wrench onto its outline and didn't look up because my eyes were doing something I didn't want her to see. On the last evening, Mom and I sat at the kitchen table. The light above the stove was steady now, no buzz, no flicker. She had her tea. I had a bank statement in front of me, the most recent one, showing the first restitution deposit, $1,247. The same number, to the penny, as that charge to Lakeshore Custom Contracting that had started everything 6 months ago, except this time the money was going the right direction. Mom looked at the number. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything about it. She sipped her tea. I folded the statement and put it back in the manila folder labeled Grant, Business, which she still kept in the same spot in the filing cabinet, because some things you don't rename, you just change what they contain. I have thought about this for a long time. Not the money. The money is arithmetic, and arithmetic doesn't care about your feelings. What I think about is the silence. Mine, Carol's, Jess's, Mom's. For 19 years, every person in this family saw some fraction of the pattern. Nobody saw all of it, because Grant was careful, but everyone saw enough to ask a question they chose not to ask. I include myself in that. I am a man who measures damage for a living, and I spent 2 decades walking past damage in my own family because measuring it would have required me to act on the findings. Silence in a family works the same way it works in a building after a catastrophe. It doesn't mean nothing is wrong. It means the structure is still standing and everyone has agreed to stop looking at the cracks. The problem is that cracks don't stabilize, they propagate, and the longer you wait to assess them, the more expensive the repair, if repair is still possible at all. I do not believe consequences are revenge. Revenge requires you to want the other person to suffer. What I wanted was for the bleeding to stop, for the numbers to stop climbing, for my mother's house to remain her house. Consequences are not something you inflict. There's something that was always accumulating behind the scenes, in a column no one was reading, until someone finally opened the ledger and read the total out loud.